Hello everybody, John here, and we're going to break down some hands from day 7 and day 8 of the 365-day challenge. I played them back to back in one big session, so both these hands came from the same session, but that session lasted about 17 hours. A couple interesting ones here. One that's a little bit wild that I'm sure I'm going to get a little bit of flack for, but we'll see how everybody enjoys these ones and see if anybody has any comments on these hands. Our first one, we have the 7-4 of diamonds. There's an under the gun raised to 20. Get my tools working again here. An under the gun raised to 20. This is a pretty tight regular who's also going to play a part in the next hand that we do. But he raises it up to 20. There's 3 calls before us. So we got a call, and a call, and a call, and we call. And one of the blinds calls. So let's assume we got a fold. So we are effectively on the button. We are in position going to the flop. 7-4 diamonds is just the kind of hand I want to play against a whole bunch of people. And the flop comes Queen of diamonds, 9 of spades, and 6 of diamonds. Okay, so we flop a flush draw. It's just a weak flush draw. You don't want to go too crazy with these kind of hands. There's still some chance somebody out here just has like nut flush draw, and we have some backdoor straight draws, but nothing super exciting. The under the gun player bets $75. There's folds here, here. This guy calls. This guy folds. And we call with our flush draw. 75. And the turn is the 3 of diamonds. So we get there right away. We have a straight flush draw as well, but we get there right away on our flush. The tight regular who's in the under the gun seat would view us as a kind of loose aggressive regular. But he knows we're pretty good, but he also knows that we play a little wild. He checks, this player checks. It's up to us with the pot being $346 going to the turn. So what do we want to bet here? We don't want to make it too cheap. I do think you want to bet here most of the time, especially if people already view you as being loose aggressive. Then you're not really going to lose any players from putting in a bet on this flush draw connecting. A lot of people are just going to assume either you picked up a draw or you're just bluffing at it. So I definitely think you want to bet. The question is how much you want to bet. If they have, let's say he has like ace king with the king of diamonds or the ace of diamonds or something like that. Excuse me. He's like 20% to win, so as long as you don't give him 4-1, you're all right. I go ahead and bet 150, which I think is reasonable. It's a reasonable price for him if he wants to try to draw to something. If he has something like aces or kings, he's definitely going to call. If he has a hand like ace-queen, he'll probably call. If he has ace-jack with a diamond, he might come along for 150, something like that. So I think it's a reasonable price. He's not quite getting the right odds yet, but if this player also calls the 150, he would be getting the right price. So it kind of puts him in a bit of a tough spot. I think it's about the right size. The under the gun player calls the 150, and this guy folds. So now we're playing specifically against a tight regular who we think views us as a pretty wild and aggressive player. The river peels off the 4 of spades. So nothing that's super effective to the board, especially given that the flop portion of this hand was queen 9-6. And he checks to us again. So the reason that we're looking at this hand today is because of talking about how you want to target different types of opponents. If I was playing against your average everyday fish, just some old farmer or an old lady or something who didn't seem like they knew poker that well, I'd probably just put in a little value bet here. It's like $646 in the pot. Maybe I bet 200, maybe 250, something to try to make it enticing for their like queen king or something like that if they have the queen jack. It's a little bit different when you're playing against very good players, and I think this guy is a pretty good player. And I decide that I think the best course of action here is to overbet the pot. So make a very large bet. it looks a little bluffy, but it also does some things like if he's sitting there with a hand like ace queen with the ace of diamonds, or pocket aces with the ace of diamonds, or pocket kings with the king of diamonds, even some sort of hand like that, it might even entice him more to call because he might think I wouldn't make this size bet unless I had the actual nuts, like the ace high flush draw, or at least like a king high flush to make a bet this size. I think 100% we're ahead here, so I'm just trying to find the bet that's going to get him to call, and I think an over bet of the pot is a good play against a guy like this. It also protects us in the future if we want to try to make big bluffs. It helps to have shown him an overbet value bet in the past so that we can make overbet bluffs in the future and have them be believable. So I go ahead and bet $820 on the river into a $646 pot, and he tanks for quite a while and ends up calling 820, and when we show him the flush, we get a muck. So a sick value bet on the river. Definitely player dependent. Against almost any other player at this table, we would have just gone for a $200 to $300 value bet here probably. But against this guy, this does a lot for us in the future. Not only makes us more money right now, but sets up our image, sets us up to be able to bluff better against him later. Like this bet a lot. It's very polarizing. It pretty much says we have a flush or we're bluffing. And that's the situation that it's going to be for the most part in the future. So I like the bet. He calls and we get paid off, and it sets us up better to play against him in the future as well. So big pot for us to win, and some good future equity for us there. Let's talk about this one last. Okay, this was probably the hand of the day. Talked about it on Twitter, talked about it a little bit in the Discord. This was probably the hand of the session. Here's how it plays out. I am under the gun. I raise to $20 with pocket kings. It folds around to the hijack. So we got fold and fold and fold, and the hijack makes it 75. This villain that's in the hijack is actually the same player from the last hand, the player that we played the big pot against. He's a tight, he's a very tight regular who pretty much always has the goods and plays in a kind of straightforward way, but is a good player. This player folds, and we get to the small blind, who makes it 225. So, this player is another very tight, solid regular, much more so even than 4. Villain 7 is a guy who plays here every day. He's clearly a professional, well, I think he has a mixture of poker and DFS, but very good player. But he plays very tight, and even he has left the big game. I mean, I don't want to call it the big game. It's really just like the main 1-2-5 game. But he has left that game multiple times if he doesn't think the edge is big enough. Like if there's a lot of other professionals at the table, he just leaves. So he's a tight player who's really looking to grind out profit, generally speaking. And he cold 4 bets to 225, and it comes back to us. So I think about this for quite a while, and I decide that probably the best thing to do is to try to give him a good price, especially since we're in position. Try to give him a good price to see a flop with us. And so I go ahead and make it 475. I don't think I can flat. We both have about $1,500 like above what's going to happen here. So like I have like 2,000 in my stack, and he has at least 1,700. We both have at least 1,500 above. So I don't think I can't just jam over this 225. That's not profitable enough. If I just flat, I'm giving him a very good price to draw against us with, if he just has like ace king here, I'm giving him a pretty good price to draw if I just call. So I go up to 475. I think that's a good number. If he calls, it's going to leave us with like a little bit over a pot size bet, or about a pot size bet left going to the flop. I think that puts us in a pretty good position. If he draws against us with a hand like jacks or queens or ace king, he's not going to be getting the right price. So I think this works out as a pretty solid bet. And we can always, if he flats here and it comes like ace something something, and he goes check, bet, call, and the turn's like a jack, or something where the board runs out very scary, we still might be able to get away from kings here later. So I think this is a good price. Villain 4 folds. It comes back around to Villain 7, and Villain 7 ships it for about 1,500 effective. I think it's actually probably a little closer to 1,600 effective. Now, he tanked for a really long time before he went all in. He thought about it for a very long time. And part of what I was thinking about in this hand was, if I was in his position, I wouldn't know whether shipping it was the right play or calling was the right play. Because with only one pot size bet behind, if I have aces and I'm villain 7, I kind of think just calling might be the right thing to do, especially if you view me as being somebody who might be capable of making a move every once in a while. You can just call the 475 and then hope I just ship it on every flop, where I might fold some hands pre. So when he tanked for a long time, I was thinking that it was likely that he was considering flatting me here rather than shipping it. But he thinks about it for a long time and goes all in. I also tank for a very long time, and I end up folding. And this is only the third time in my entire poker career. I've played millions of hands, and this is only the third time I've ever folded kings pre-flop. I'm sure some of this had to do with the fact that we're having a winning session here already. We've had a very good day to start, and this pot would undo a lot of good work that we've done. But also, this guy has just been very tight and played very solid, and it just seemed a little bizarre that he would 6-bet ship it on me with anything that wasn't aces. Remember, in these games, man, a lot of times people just flat raises with like jacks. I've definitely seen people just fold like 10s and jacks and stuff in his position in a hand like this, where there's an under the gun raise and then a 3-bet, or just flat. I've definitely seen a lot of that kind of play live that doesn't really happen in online tournaments. If this is online, I mean, it's just an instant snap. You just snap this off and you're excited about it. He shows up with ace king here a bunch of times, queens, jacks, probably the other 2 kings. But in these live settings, you just don't see these like 6 bets pre-flop. Like, they just don't happen. In fact, this might be the only 6-bet that I've seen since I've been here. So I end up folding, and let's look at what goes into that as far as math. I just want to bring up the poker stove real quick. So let's assume, let's look at the different ranges that he can have. So if he just has aces, we're 18%, which, so even though it's only 1,100 more to call this shove to win like 3,200, it's not a good call, assuming he only has aces. But let's give him a range of, let's give us kings. If we give him a range of like aces and queens, then it's an easy call. We have to call 1,100 more to win like 3. We're getting basically 3 to 1. Oh, well, let's see, 20. We're getting like 2.5 to 1. So it's an easy call if we think he can have queens. If we think he can have something like, and this is a mistake a lot of people make, by the way, is not realizing how clear this math is in other situations. If we think he can have aces, ace, king, and queens, then it's like the easiest call of all time. So even if we think his range is that tight, just aces, ace, king, and queens, it's an easy call. So really the only way you can make this fold is if you think the only hand he would ever do this with is aces. And in this spot, I thought that was the only hand that he would make this move with, and it turns out I was wrong. After I folded, he showed pocket queens. He knew what I had. I said when I was considering calling, is there any chance you have the other 2 kings? So he knew what I was folding and ended up showing queens and caused a lot of controversy around the table. And it might have been a fish fold, but man, I just did not feel like this guy was, honestly, I didn't think he would want to get this much money in with queens with the way that I'd seen him play before. And he looked uncomfortable, but in a way like he was trying to figure out how not to screw this up. And so like I felt like he had aces and just turned out to be very wrong. So we probably won't be making that mistake again. Like I said, I've probably been dealt pocket kings like 200,000 times, and I've only folded them pre-flop 3 times. The first 2 times I did it in my life, I was right, and this is the first time that I was wrong. So we broke our streak of always folding kings in the right spot. Probably going back, I mean, there's no other player at the table where I would have been able to fold here. It was just because of the image that I had of this player. And I still have that image of him, really, but I know he's a little willing to be a little bit more aggressive now. The main thing I should have thought about more in this hand is how he views me, because I even talked about it when I was talking to you guys, but most people at this table probably view me as a very loose aggressive regular who could randomly show up with like 8-9 suited here. And so in that case, I mean, when other people view you that way, this becomes a much easier call. So I should have thought more about that. I do think going back that the right play was to call specifically because of that information, the fact that these players view me as someone who might fold here with like 8-9. So a bad play, I think, but one that I think was at least somewhat defensible in the moment. But looking back, I definitely think it was a call, and we made a mistake. So lost ourselves about $500 in value here, and a possible, possible $3,000 or $2,000 extra in getting all in here. Such is life. Now we'll go to a hand that played out much later in the session. And this hand is against a player who I think, of all the players that I've played with in San Antonio so far, I think this guy is probably the best player that I've seen. I think he's a better player than me. I do think that a lot of these live pros make some mistakes that I don't make. But at the same time, I think this guy's probably a better player than me, and I basically did not win a pot against this guy, and I sat at the table with him for about 7 hours. He's just relentless. He bets every street. He never folds, and somehow, he just reads situations well enough that it works out for him. I do think, like I said, that he's a better player than I am, and there's not very many players here that I really think have an edge on me, and this guy is one of them, which makes this hand just even more interesting. Okay, so in this hand, I'm dealt pocket nines. It folds to me in the hijack. I raise to 40. There's a $10 button straddle in this hand. So I raise to 40. There is a call and a call. And our villain is going to be in the 4 seat here, and he re-raises to 125. Villain 5 folds. We're very deep stacked at this point in the night. I want to say 2,500 or 3,000 in our stacks at this point, so this is a really clear flat for me. We could 4-bet. I think nines is probably good enough for that, but generally speaking, when I play live, I want to see flops as deep as possible with as many players as possible and just navigate them as best I can post-flop, rather than trying to get a bunch of money in pre-flop when things are at the highest variance. So for me, this is just an automatic. It's a free call. I never really considered doing anything else. And weirdly enough, both these guys fold. Normally, I would expect at least one of these guys to call the extra 85. But they both fold, and the pot is $183 going to the flop. And this hand is going to show you the value of aggression. All the best poker players are very aggressive players, and I think this hand is going to give people a really good idea of why. So we have pocket nines, and the flop comes Jack of diamonds, 8 of diamonds, and 7 of spades. So we flop a gut shot, and we still have our pair of nines, which is respectable on this board. If our opponent had something like ace-king, ace-queen, which is definitely the kind of hands... he 3-bet me earlier in the day with ace-10. He's 3-bet with ace or with king-queen before. So all these kinds of hands are all in his range. He could certainly have a hand like pocket sixes. And see how already when I'm talking about hands he might 3-bet with, this list is very long. And there's many players in this game where when they 3-bet me, their range is like aces, kings, queens, jacks, ace-king. And that's all. And that makes it very easy to play against them. With this guy, he could have any pocket pair. He could have king-queen, king-jack, ace-10, ace-jack, ace-queen, ace-king. He could have like any of those kinds of hands. So we have not narrowed down his range very much at all. So when he bets 100 on the flop, which is a solid bet here, I like the 3-bet and bet less than your 3-bet on the flop strategy, generally speaking. If you have a really strong hand, it can induce. It also lets you bluff for cheaper as long as you stay consistent with your bet sizing. This is not necessarily my favorite board for it, but I still like it in general. He bets 100, and it seems like a pretty easy call. We got a draw, reasonable pair. Let's see how the board shapes up from here. So there is $383 in the pot going to the turn. And the turn is a 4 of spades. On the turn, our opponent bets 225. So he's a little over half pot here, coming up on 3/4 pot, and it's or 2/3 pot rather. And we were kind of in the same position we were in on the flop, right? Like if he had aces or kings, or queens or whatever, ace jack, he's still ahead of us. If he had ace king, ace queen, whatever, he's still behind us. If he has spades or diamonds with no pair, I would expect him to be betting this turn. So I don't think there's really much value in raising. I'm not sure what hands we beat that are going to call us. Maybe you could put in like a min raise here and just hope to get called by like flush draws and straight draws. I think there might be some value in that. It also might disguise your hand a little bit if you put in a raise here, but we still have a lot of money behind. I'm not really looking to bloat this pot super large if I can help it. Kind of calling, hoping that he's going to give up on the river or that we improve in some way that helps us out. So we call 225. So there is $823 in the pot going to the river. And the river is a very interesting card. It is the 9 of diamonds. So there's now a 4 straight on the board. Just a 10 makes a straight. And there's 3 diamonds. Diamonds got there off the flop. So we kind of reverse, in a way, a lot of the hands that we were hoping he didn't have on the flop and turn, we're now hoping he has. And a lot of the hands we were hoping that he had on the flop and turn, we're now hoping he didn't have. If he was drawing with a hand like Queen 10 or even something like King 10, he might have been bluffing here, or a hand like Diamonds, he might have been semi-bluffing here. All those hands we were hoping he had on the turn, we're hoping he doesn't have them now. Aces, kings, queens, those kinds of hands, even a hand like pocket 8s or 7s, we were hoping he didn't have those on the flop and turn, and now we're kind of hoping he does. So it does like a complete switcheroo. It also puts a card out there that if he's looking at our range, there's a lot of hands of ours that might not be so good on this river, and there's a lot of hands of ours that got a lot better on this river. So this is just a super interesting card. Both people's ranges are like completely thrown off by this card. And he bets $800, a pot-sized bet on the river. And it's a great bet. I like it. And it makes it very tough on us. If he thinks we have a hand like Queen Jack or King Jack or Ace Jack or something like that, this bet should get us off those hands. So it's a good bluff card for him if he thinks that we have a hand like that. If he was semi-bluffing his diamonds, he got there. If he was semi-bluffing the Queen 10 or whatever, he got there. If he missed his spades, this is a great bluff card against a lot of our range. And if it's a bad card against our range, he's going to find out pretty fast. I mean, if we river to flush here, he's going to find out pretty quickly. So he bets 800. What do we do? What would you do if you were me? If you have the 9s here. And what do you think he has? Just giving everybody a second to decide if they think they have any sort of opinion on what he might have here. In the end, aggression, this is why aggression is so good, is because his range is still not very defined to me on this river, as far as the various hands he can have. And I have very much almost no idea whether this should be a call or not, because he just constantly bets every street and every pot that we've played. There's so many different hands he might be going for value with here. There's so many different hands he might be bluffing with. It's just so hard to figure out what you're supposed to do in a spot like this, and that's why aggression is so good. In the end, I call the 800 on the river, and he shows Jack 10 offsuit. So he 3-bet us with the Jack 10 offsuit. He flopped a pair of jacks with a gut shot, and when we made our set, he rivered a straight and bets the 800. I really like his bet too in that it's a big bet, but he can still get away from his hand if I raise here. If I have diamonds, I'm going to raise probably, and he can still get away from his hand. If I have a really weak flush, I'm probably actually just going to call this bet on the river because it's so big. So he's going to get full value out of some hands like the one that I have. He's not going to lose any extra money against a flush because if I raise here, he can really clearly just fold. But I can't really do that like light very often because it's very clear that he also can have a hand like ace king of diamonds. So I'm not going to be able to bluff him here very often. Interesting hand. We lose it, and like I said, I just really didn't win a pot against this guy all day. One of the few players I've played against that I think is definitely better than me, and I would not want to play with them if it was just like a heads-up game or something like that. Almost everybody I've played with, I would play heads-up. This is one of the few guys I wouldn't. So, interesting session. Starting tomorrow, we're going to be playing mostly tournament poker for the next week, I think. So I'll get back to you guys tomorrow with some tournament hands, perhaps. So good luck, everybody. Good night, and let me know what you thought of these hands if you end up watching.